Listen up, people. That's right. It's time to listen to the sparks of bliss in your life. I'm your host and life coach, Caroline de Posada from Miami, Florida. And this podcast is an invitation to join me in upgrading our mindset, wellness, and relationships so that together we create a life that unlocks our bliss. Join me each week as we explore practical strategies, inspiring stories, and the moments of clarity, or as we like to call them, los momenticos, that make the world a little more magical. Consider this your weekly dose of wisdom in your pocket. Are you ready? Let's do this.
Hey, listeners, welcome to episode number 29 of Blissin' Up. Today is an important episode, and I hope you stay with me to the end because I'm giving you 3 principles that you can apply in your life when you are in those tough, emotional, high tension moments. This can be when you are feeling fear of the unknown, or you're feeling like you're in chaos, or you feel threatened by the future, or you feel uncertain about it. This is during a time when you feel like that intense energy. And I know that as a collective, the United States has been feeling that because we've been in the elections, right? These times of elections tend to be times where there's high energy, high tension. People are disagreeing with each other. People are kind of like committed to their side, one versus the other. There's a lot of uncertainty of the future. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the next 4 years. So there's like this tension, this energy that happens, and we can get consumed by that. Our emotional wellness can really be consumed by that, and we can get caught up in it. And it's not just necessarily like what's happening as a collective. It also happens in your personal life too. I can tell you that last week I faced this in my personal life because I'm even embarrassed to admit this, but it's true. I crashed my son's car. Yep, you heard that right. I crashed my son's car. My son, who just turned 16, who we gave a car to for his 16th birthday, who we've had the car for 2 weeks. I just crashed it. I know, you guys, this is insane. It's insane. So I'm going to get into that, and I'm going to explain to you what happened. But more importantly than what happened is the tools that I realized we all need during these times. So whether you are facing an issue in your marriage, or you're struggling with your children or work, or just, the United States, like the news, the media has consumed you, or you're just feeling those high tension moments, this is important. This is important. Now, I wanted to share this with you because I think you should also know this. If you don't know me personally, like if this is your first time listening to this episode, hi, my name is Caro. But I wanted to share this with you so that you know where I'm coming from. I have been studying personal development since I was 7 years old. This all started because my father was a motivational speaker. He was a psychologist, and he involved me in this work since I was a little girl. I've been basically his apprentice my whole life, attending seminars with him, reading books, listening to what used to be audio cassettes, but then turned into CDs, and now has evolved into podcasts and different kind of media. But the bigger point is that I've been studying it forever. These principles, these tools. And my dad did a really good job at always helping me integrate these into my life, even as he navigated his disease with cancer, how we navigated, the divorces in our family, the relationship issues, the different things that we work through in our lives. I got to have a hands-on approach at integrating these principles in everything and learning how to live a life doing that. I think one of the best trainings I ever had was my dad's a battle against cancer for 17 years and seeing how he managed that. That's really where I was introduced to also the concept of stoicism, which I am a student of, and I believe in, and I love, and I implement in my life. So I had that. But in addition to that, I also went to law school and I became a lawyer. And the reason that that is important is because up until the time that I went to law school, I knew about personal development, and I had been studying these principles, but I also felt that the world is very black and white, which can happen sometimes when you're studying this stuff. You can become a little arrogant and kind of get stuck in your ego and be like, there's right and there's wrong, and there's nothing in the middle. And that happens to us. Sometimes it happens to us with religion. Sometimes it happens to us with certain principles. Sometimes it happens to us when we change our diet and or read a parenting book, and then all of a sudden we think our way is the only way, and we preach it, and we think everything else is not proper. It's black and white. But then I went to law school, and law school introduced me to the world of gray. Law school helped me understand that there are two sides to every story, that things aren't necessarily right or wrong, but rather it's about the way that you present the arguments. It's about the light that you shine on the facts of the case, and how you can tailor your arguments with the same facts. You can have the same facts and two opposing sides and two opposing arguments, and that you can actually see validity in each one. And I studied that, and that world of gray was a game changer in my life, because it really helped me integrate Stephen Covey's in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about concepts like win-win and synergy and seek to understand before being understood. And I was able to see that in the setting of law school, in learning this gray area, and also really understanding how you can have case law, and then case law can be reversed, and then you can have one thing that you believe is the truth, and then a different argument is made, and then you see a different truth. And that really expanded my perception and my brain, and allowed me to be more open and more curious as to the way that people think about things. So that, combined with the personal development, like being a lawyer plus being an apprentice in personal development all these years, has really given me a hands-on experience to these principles. So when I share them with you, I'm sharing them from a place of like deep understanding, that I've been studying them for a long time. So hopefully my experience and my understanding can help you in your life as you implement these tools, which maybe you already have, but if you don't, they can be real game changers. So I think the best place to start is by sharing with you what happened with my son's car. So my son Orly turned 16 in October, and even though he doesn't get his license until early December, just because of the timing of when he got his restricted, etc., we really wanted to gift him his car on his birthday. And then we were going to have the car for him to drive with his mom or his dad around and get used to that particular car before he goes out on his own in December and drives with a license. So we've had the car for a couple of weeks, and I had this gnawing feeling in my heart that I had to have a heart-to-heart conversation with my husband. So I'm sitting in my office. This is a Wednesday evening. I'm sitting in my office, and Orlando, my husband, walks through the door to talk to me about something, and he happens to mention Orly's name. And in that moment, I was like, oh, Orlando, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. Are you prepared to get the call that Orly has crashed his car? Now, obviously, he hadn't crashed the car, but my thought was, this is a 16-year-old boy. He's been driving for a year. Things happen. It's a real possibility that he may crash his car. He may, make a mistake. And I just felt that Orlando and I had to be on the same page as to how we were going to handle a call like that. So I say that to my husband, and he looks at me. He's like, I've been thinking about it too. And I, we can't, what are we going to do? He's young. He's bound to make some mistakes. If he crashes his car, we're going to have to be supportive and figure it out. I mean, it's just the way that life works. And I said, oh, I'm so glad that you think that way, because me too. I just feel that we're going to have to be compassionate with him. Obviously, always like trying to help him be responsible, but just we're going to have to be graceful and understand that things happen, and hopefully, it won't be bad, but we just have to be prepared. We have to be prepared that is a possibility in this world. So we have this little conversation about it. We both get on the same page. I just feel much more settled, and we go on with our business. And then Thursday morning, Orly wants to take his car to school, because in the mornings he likes to drive his car to school, and then I'm driving it back. And on my way back from dropping him off at school, I crashed the car. And I had to make the call. And Orlando got the call that Orly's car had been crashed the morning after we had the conversation, only to find out that it was his wife who crashed the car, not his son. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated at that moment. And I wasn't so much devastated about the crash as I was about the fact that I crashed my son's car. He's young. He just got this little car. It's used, but it looks brand new. And he was all excited about it. And I just felt so sad that I had done anything that would hurt him. We care more about those things when it comes to our children than ourselves. I mean, if I had crashed my own car, I think I would have been fine about it, but it was his. So I was really, really sad about it. And truth be told, I was a little bit nervous about how he was going to react, right? I mean, how was he going to handle it? Was he going to be mad at me? Was he going to be upset about the car? I didn't know what to expect from any front. I didn't know what to expect from my husband or from him. And I just felt a lot of shame in that this had happened, which actually leads me to the first principle that we get to apply in moments like this. And that is the principle of radical responsibility. Radical responsibility is taking full ownership of your thoughts, actions, and responses to whatever is happening in your life. It's basically focusing on what is within your control, taking ownership of what is yours in a situation that has occurred in your life. Now, radical responsibility is not the same as blame. When something happens, especially in an accident or, like in these times of elections and all this stuff, the tendency is to blame, to look for blame in somebody else, look for who's at fault. In fact, one of the first things that people ask me when they find out that I crashed my son's car, the question is, well, whose fault was it? Now, I said at the beginning when this happened that the first thing that I felt was shame. That is because blame provokes shame. I felt shamed because I felt that I was to blame for this happening. The day before, I had told my husband, what if our son crashes the car and here I am crashing the car? I felt that I was to blame for what happened. And blame takes away your power because blame provokes shame. And then you spiral into sadness and self-loathing and judging yourself and just being harsh with yourself and all these unproductive emotions. So when I talk about radical responsibility, I am not talking about blame. In fact, if we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, I actually didn't think I was at fault for the accident. I thought it was the other guy's fault, even though I ended up being the one that got the ticket because the police officer said that my version of this, if it was my version of the story, I would be at fault. If it was his version of the story, he would be at fault. But because of the position I was in the car, he had to give me the ticket just based on a technicality unless there was witnesses. So I was deemed at fault for the accident, even though I didn't believe that it was my fault. But none of that is actually what radical responsibility is. Radical responsibility is taking ownership of what has happened, which is irrelevant of whether it is your fault or whether you are to blame or not to blame, whether you've been wronged or you've been harmed or you've been put in this situation, irrelevant of whether it is your fault. Active responsibility, a radical responsibility, is about taking ownership of what is within your control. So in that moment, I had the opportunity to take ownership of what was within my control. What was within my control was to call the police officer, to stay there for the accident, to take responsibility for the accident, to call my insurance company, and also to think back at how I participated to be in that moment. Because right before I took the road that I took, that I crashed in, I actually had a little thought in my brain. And that was, God, maybe you shouldn't take that road. That road is dangerous. I don't know why I had that thought, but I had it. And I didn't act on that thought. So in that moment, I participated to the accident by not listening to my intuition that told me, don't take this road today. That is accepting radical responsibility. Now, just like I said, blame provokes shame. Radical responsibility provokes power. Because when you accept radical responsibility, you are in the driver's seat of what's going to happen next. You decide how you are going to respond to this, how you're going to handle this, how you're going to own up to this, and how that gives you all the power back. It takes you out of being a victim and into taking action for what you can control. And that may mean defending yourself, or it may mean accepting the consequences for something that you've done wrong, or it may mean participating in solving a problem, or it may mean owning up to a conversation or apologizing, whatever it means for you. Radical responsibility is about ownership. Ownership. That's what I want you to think about. Regardless of what has happened to you, regardless of who's at fault, what is within your control? How are you in charge of your thoughts, actions, and responses? And how are you going to show up in that light, coming from a place of power instead of shame? The second principle is that of radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is the practice of fully accepting your reality as it is, without judgment, resistance, or the need to change it. That is a tough one, because obviously there are so many things in our life that happen that we wish wouldn't happen. But the person who pointed this out to me was my mother-in-law. When my mother-in-law came over the day of the accident and I told her what happened, I was teary-eyed. She looked at me and she said, "You know what, Carol? Today I was reading back on my journal from 2020. And in that journal I had an entry that said, today Carol wrote about the practice of radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is about accepting your circumstances as if you had chosen them." When she said that to me, she reminded me of the reason I wrote that article, and it was because of my dear friend Betsy. Betsy has a sister with mental retardation. And one day we were talking about her sister and about her parents. And she said something to me that I thought was so beautiful that it prompted me to write a blog post about it back then when I did that. She said that she had always seen her parents accept their daughter and her illness as with so much grace and love that it was almost as if they had chosen it. Like they never complained. They never had a sob story. They never spoke about wishing that their daughter would be different. They just accepted her as if they had chosen that to be her condition, because they believed that this is for their greater good, that there was something for them to learn. They just radically accepted their daughter the way that she was. And that always moved me, because that's a hard thing to do. It is hard to accept your circumstances as if you had chosen them. And when my mother-in-law presented me with my very own words on that day, I thought, oh my goodness, how could I show up in radical acceptance as if I had chosen to have this accident, even though I wish I hadn't? So the challenge is to radically accept your present circumstances as they are, even if you wish it wasn't so. And once again, when you do that, it brings you back to your power. It helps reduce the suffering and the resistance against fighting against reality. Because even though you wish it wasn't so, radical acceptance invites you to be at peace in difficult situations. It's understanding, it's the acknowledgement that we are not in control of everything in our life, and we cannot change the past. We cannot change even the immediate past, and we have to move forward with the circumstances as they are in that moment. And finally, the third principle in managing your emotions and tapping into your resilience is the principle of radical reframing. Now, to me, this is the magic sauce of all of it. This is the principle that allows you to grab all these tools and grab your life and turn it into a life of magic, of synchronicity, and of meaning. Radical reframing is about connecting the dots. It's about looking for the lessons, and it's about finding ways to see how this is in fact rigged in your favor. Radical acceptance and radical responsibility are terms that I've learned about throughout the years, but radical reframing is something that I have made up in an effort to show you how to just shift your perspective on the way that things happen. Just put on a different lens, because in reality, and again, this goes back to being a lawyer, right? You can have a set of facts and you can argue it one way or argue it the other way. And really all you're doing is choosing which way you're going to argue it. And radical reframing is about reframing the story that you tell yourself with these set of facts in search of evidence that life is rigged in your favor, that this is training you for something bigger, that this is all part of the magic of your soul and of your soul's path. And that adds meaning to all of this, because what is this life if we don't add meaning to it? And in the moments when we just don't quite see it, when we don't see the lessons, we don't see how it's rigged in our favor, we can't connect the dots. In that moment, radical reframing is about surrendering to the mystery and accepting the beauty that will follow. Because there are times in our lives that things happen that we wish were not so. There are things that happen that are unthinkable, unnameable, and we can't even imagine why they've happened. And yet, even in amidst horrible things, even amidst like the biggest tragedies, there always seems to be beauty that follows. Maybe it's the beauty of your community coming to rally in support of you. Maybe it's the beauty in the miracles that keep you going. Maybe it's beauty in the relationships that are mended as a result of it, or the relationships that are born because of it. We don't know exactly how these things happen, but even in the worst of tragedies, oftentimes we can find so much beauty post like the horror. And therefore, even in those moments when you don't know how to reframe your situation, I think this practice is about surrender. It's surrendering to the mystery of it. Now, after I crashed and I was sad the whole day and I had that conversation with my mother-in-law, I had to go and face my son and tell him that I had crashed his car. And I decided to drive over to his school to pick him up because I figured I didn't want to tell him and then have him wait the whole time to see what the damage was. I'd rather him just look at it. So I got into his car and I drove over to school, and I was in the driver's seat, and he was walking towards the car, and I see him like look at the car, and all of a sudden his face changes like, wait, what happened? What is that? And he walks up to the driver's seat to look at me, and he's like, Mom, his eyes are open wide. And I'm just looking at him, and tears start to roll down my eyes. And he opens the door and he says, Mommy, are you okay? Are you safe? Are you okay? And he just starts to hug me and just showed me so much grace and so much compassion. And I started crying, and I'm like, I'm sorry, Orly. And he says, Mom, it's just a car. What matters is that you're safe. What matters is that you're okay. What happened? And he just like kept hugging me. And in that moment, I found the beauty in that I had been preparing this entire time to show grace to my son if my son made a mistake. And in that moment, it was my son who showed grace to me when I made a mistake. And I thought, oh, he's a good kid. He has a good heart. He has good principles. In fact, I was so struck by how compassionate he was that I was like, did he already know about this? I was like, did my husband tell him beforehand? And I was talking to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, I don't know. Maybe Orlando called him beforehand and was like, listen, your mom is really upset and she had this accident. I want you to make sure that you're compassionate with her. And my mom said something beautiful to me. She said, Caro, if your husband didn't call your son and tell him about the accident, that shows how compassionate and how wonderful your son is. And that's an amazing thing. But if he did, that shows how compassionate and amazing your husband is and what a good father he is in teaching your son to be compassionate. So either way, it's a win. And I thought, she's right. It's a win either way. So in that moment, I realized that I had been preparing all this time to how I was going to handle something that happened to my son. And then when it happened to me, I kind of shamed myself and felt guilty and felt that, like I was terrible because of a mistake that I had made. And this was an opportunity for me to look in the mirror and say, you deserve the same grace that your son deserves. And sometimes those are the lessons that we get to learn in this life, is that we are very compassionate to everybody else, but we're not nearly as compassionate to ourselves. And we're very, even when we are blaming someone else for things that happen to us, it's oftentimes because we are afraid that by accepting responsibility, we have to accept the shame and the pain of being wrong or of having made a mistake. And that's so painful that we avoid doing it. But the truth is that we don't have to do that. When we implement radical acceptance, radical responsibility, and radical reframing, we take the things that happen in our lives and they become lessons. They become nuggets of wisdom. They become a story that we'll share one day with someone that needs to hear it. They become ways for us to be more empathetic and more graceful and more compassionate, because we're all human and we all make mistakes and life happens. So if you are in a time where you are facing judgment or criticism or uncertainty or fear of anything that's going around in your life, I want you to listen to this episode and I want you to ask yourself these questions. How can I radically accept this moment as if I had chosen it? How can I seek to understand before being understood? Open my eyes and approach this with curiosity, understanding that there may be sides of this that I simply don't see. How can I accept radical responsibility for what is within my control? As the Stoics would say, I must remain true to my job, and that is to stay good, stay sane, stay calm, and act with courage, discipline, justice, and wisdom. And finally, how can I radically reframe this moment? so that I may find the miracles, the magic, and the meaning behind all the things that happen in my life. That's what I got for you today. I hope that this has been informative and given you a lot to reflect on this sacred Sunday, and I will see you next week. Bye, everybody. That's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. I am deeply, deeply grateful for this time to connect. If you're loving this podcast, I'd love if you could support me by subscribing, rating, and or leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those reviews help us so much. And if you know of someone who could really use a voice like mine in their head, please share this with them and let them know how much you care about their bliss. Now, if you are feeling called to dig deeper and really work on elevating your mindset, wellness, and your relationships to create a healthier, happier, and more meaningful life, then I invite you to schedule a 60-minute complimentary consultation with me. Let's have a meaningful conversation and see if working together is in our future. You can find the link to the calendar of consults right there in my show notes, but you can also connect with me on my website, carolinedeposada.com, or just send me a DM on Instagram at Caroline de Posada. Like my friend always says, the project is big and you're a part of it. So thanks for being here.